Hi, I'm Dougherty, CEO of White Wizard Games. I'm here with Sorcerer. Sorcerer is our latest game, and in Sorcerer, you play evil sorcerers battling for control of Victorian London. The base set can play 2 to 4 players, and Sorcerer is kind of a mashup between a strategy card game and like a tabletop war game. In Sorcerer, at the beginning of the game, each player creates their Sorcerer by choosing one of the 4 character decks, combining it with one of the 4 lineage decks, and one of the 4 domain decks. Your character deck is who you are, your lineage deck is what type of magic you've inherited, and your domain deck is where you've been training and gathering followers. So, for example, if we were to choose this character, this lineage, and this domain, we would take the cover cards off. These would get set in front of us. The remaining cards would get shuffled up, and those would be our deck for the game. These cards would give us special abilities that we could use during the course of the game in whatever location our avatar standee is in. So this represents you in the game. You can't die, but you can lead your forces and give them special bonuses in whatever one of these locations you put the standee in. In addition to giving you special abilities you can use during the course of the game, these cards also give you your character's true name. So in this case, we'd be playing Masilda, the Necromancer of the Forgotten Temple. Now there are 64 possible character combinations in the base set alone, and if you get expansion character lineage or domain packs, of course your number of combinations goes way up. Okay, so each player in the game gets one of these player boards, and this tracks all the information you need during the course of the game. The game comes with 4 player boards because you can play out of up to 4 players out of the base set. This track here, it tracks your energy, and you get a big, nice glass bead for that. You'll start out with 6 energy. As you play spells, your energy will go down, and you can rest to gain more energy during the game. This track here tracks your actions. You get a little red bead that tracks your actions. Every time you spend an action, you'll slide the red bead down 1. Over here, you put the Ullman Tokens that you'll be collecting during the game. So you get 1 at the start of each round, and you'll be collecting more as you play cards. And then the player who's going first for the round gets this big fate counter, and that goes right here. And then finally, your deck goes here on the scrolls, and your discard pile, called your graveyard, goes here on the pile of bones. And you've got a nice little cheat sheet here in the center to help remind you of the rules. So, Sorcerer has 2 primary phases. There's the action phase and the battle phase. During the action phase, players will take turns taking actions. So so the player with the first player marker will take the first action, and when they take an action, they'll slide the red bead down 1 on the action action track here, and then they'll choose one of these things to do. When you play an action, you can channel energy. When you channel energy, you gain 2 energy. So you just slide the blue bead up 2 spaces on the energy track. You can also spend an action to meditate. When you do that, you draw 2 cards. You can spend an action to cast a spell. Now, every card in your deck will have a cost in the upper left-hand corner. So, for example, that one costs 6, that one costs 4, this little guy costs 1. So when you play a spell, you pick a card in your hand to play, you move your action counter down 1, you lower your energy by the amount that the card costs, and then you choose one of the 3 battlefields to play that minion in. The location that you play the minion in, that's where it's going to be fighting, and that's where its special abilities work. So let's say you played a minion that gave all your other zombies +2 attack. That would only give the benefit to the zombies that were in the same battlefield as the zombie lord was. If you had a zombie in a different battlefield, they would not get the bonus. So the bonuses are local, and any special abilities are local, and of course the combat is going to be local to whichever battlefield you play the minions in. You can also spend an action to activate a power. Some of your cards, like your character skill card, will say action : do some awesome thing. To do that awesome thing, you spend your action and you just read and follow the text on the card, which has the action-based power. And finally, you can spend an action to move your minions around. So you can spend an action to reinforce, and when you do that, you get to move a minion from one of the battlefields to a neighboring battlefield. So if you're in trouble in one of the battlefields, you might want to move one of your big minions over to help you out.
Now, how would that look like?
All right, so basically there are these 3 battlefields.
These are your minions?
These are damage trackers for the battlefield itself, and the minions are the cards themselves. So let's say I were to play this big demon. I would lower my action by 1. I would lower my energy by 6 because that's his cost up here, and then I would choose one of these 3 battlefields to play this guy into, and that's where he'd be fighting. And also, he has a special ability that at the end of each round, he does 2 damage to each minion in that area. That ability would work only where he is. So if I played him here in Whitechapel, that he would fight here, and his damage at end of round effect would happen here. But let's say I had another minion over here in Southwark, his ability would not affect this area over here. So basically, the abilities are local. That reinforce ability. So let's say we were fighting and you were getting you were getting too far ahead over here, and I was like, oh, I need to move in more forces. I could spend an action for this guy who's already in play to move him over from this battlefield over to that one. So we'll go back and forth spending actions. I'll spend an action, you'll spend an action. I'll spend an action, you'll spend an action. Back and forth making those plays. So we'll gain energy, draw cards, play guys out on the table, and we'll throughout the course of the round, we'll each have 6 actions. And when we're done with all our actions, we'll end up with various stuff on the battlefields. And then once we're both out of actions, the action phase is over and you move on to the battle phase. In the battle phase, you deal with battlefields one at a time. And when you're doing that, I'll move these over so they're a little easier to see. So we'll pretend these guys are in the middle battlefield. When you're doing that, you choose a minion to attack with. So for example, you might choose to attack with this minion. And this guy has a sword value of 3 there. That's his attack value. And that tells you how many dice that minion rolls in combat. And blanks are misses, skulls are hits, double skulls are 2 hits, and stars are critical hits. So let's say we got this result on the dice. The attacking player chooses where critical hit damage goes. You could do it to the battlefield, tracking it here, or you could put damage on the minions. And when minions take damage, you put one of these little damage counters on. Then the defending player chooses where the regular damage goes. So I could take that 2 damage, and I could put it both on my battlefield, both on the minion, or I could split it up and do 1 on each. Once that minion's roll is resolved, we attack with the next minion. Now this guy's got 6 attacks, so we would roll 6 attack dice. The maximum number of attack dice in any one roll is 7, so attack values can go up to 7 in the game. And in this case, we have 6 points of damage. Now, these Ullman tokens, you start the game with one of them, and every time you play a card that has an omen underneath its cost, like this guy, that little star right there under the cost, every time you play a card that has one of those, you get another omen. So during the course of the game, you'll build up these omen counters. During combat, you can use these to re-roll battle dice. So I could spend an omen to pick a die that I didn't like the result on and re-roll it, and I can do that as many times as I want. then I pass to my opponent, and then they can spend their omens if they want to force me to re-roll dice where they don't like the result. You go back and forth doing that until both players pass, and then the damage is final. So in this case, we've got 8 points of damage, so you might choose to put one of them here and 7 onto the battlefield, and then this guy would attack. So you go back and forth making attacks until all the attacks have been done. If you can get your opponent's side of the battlefield up to 12 points of damage, you flip this over to the ruined side of the city and put a control marker on your side of it, and you've won that battlefield. Once that happens, there's no more fighting in that location. Any minions that are there, just stay there and wait for you to move them in future rounds using the reinforced action to move them to battlefields where the fighting's still going on. Once that battlefield's done, you move on to the next battlefield and resolve all the combat there. So each of these locations is a completely separate battle, but you can move your forces, your minions back and forth from one battlefield to another.
Awesome. So, does the game end when all 3 are under control?
So when in a 2-player game or in a 2 versus 2 team game, there are 3 battlefields in the center, and the game ends when one player has won 2 of the 3 battlefields. Right. So you're playing to a best 2 out of 3. In 3 and 4 player individual play mode, there's battlefields between players. Every time you win a battlefield in that mode, you get a victory point, and then the battlefield resets. If you and everything at the battlefield that got reset dies. In that mode, the first player to 3 victory points wins. So there's different setups depending on which game mode you're doing. But in the 2-player game, you have the 3 battlefields in the center. First person to get a control marker on 2 of the 3 battlefields wins the game.
Now, the omen markers, are these strictly for re-rolling dice?
They're strictly for re-rolling dice. So basically, you'll collect them during the course of the game. You can save them as long as you want, and you can use them for re-rolling dice. These damage counters are permanent. When you build up damage counters on a guy, they just stay there. If you ever get damage counters equal to the shield value on the minion, that's called their essence, then they would die and go to the discard pile. If they happen to die before they make their attack for the round, they just don't get to attack. So sometimes those critical hits can be hugely important to kill off a minion who's almost dead. Other times, there's not great targets for them, so sometimes those rolls can be a little more meaningful than others, meaning that you may want to save your Ullman tokens to defend yourself versus criticals in certain situations, or to try and get those rolls when you really need them.
Okay. Now, what happens if you run out of cards in your deck? Is that a thing that...
It can happen. It's super, super rare. But if you did run out of cards in your deck, you simply would have no more cards to draw. So you would have to finish out the game with the cards you have remaining, what you have in play, your special abilities from your character, and any cards left in your hand. It's very rare, and usually if you run out of cards, then very shortly afterwards, maybe in that round's battle phase, the game will be finished, because there's a lot of damage swinging back and forth while you're burning through the cards in your deck. So pretty rare for that to happen. But if you did, you just play on without more cards.
Okay. Very cool. So is this, I know you're selling this on the floor right now. Is this game in retail?
It is. So basically, it came out this summer, it's available at hobby retail stores. It's available at Barnes and Noble, and of course, it's available online as well. You can find it at whitewizardgames.com or various online sites, or of course your local game store. And we also have some new expansions coming out for it in August. We have a new character pack, a new lineage, and a new domain, which adds to your selection. Now, each of these decks, the character deck, the lineage deck, the domain deck, they play differently. All the cards in them are completely different from the cards in other decks. They have different special abilities. So, for example, the Necromancer has zombie cards that come out of the discard pile and can come back into play. So they tend to swarm the various battlefields with lots of small minions that keep coming back from the dead. The Demonologist has these flame tokens. They can set things on fire, and things with these flame tokens on it take damage at the end of every single round, so they'll slowly burn to death. And they have some very powerful effects that they can do to enemy minions that have flame counters on them, so kind of lights them up for future effects. The Bloodlord, the vampires, have some of the most expensive minions and most powerful minions in the game, the Elder Vampires, and they have some incredibly powerful effects. And they also collect up blood during the game. They have this special mechanic where they have a special card which allows them to track the blood that they're gaining, and then they can spend the blood during the game to do special powerful effects. The Animist has summons up spiders, and they drive their opponent insane. That's represented by you stealing cards from your opponent's hand, their deck, their discard pile, trapping them under your minions. Every time you do that, you get one of these little spider counters, and these spider counters give you +1 attack on your minion. When your minion dies, all the cards that were stolen from your opponent go back to their discard pile. So each of these types of magic have very different effects. The different character decks have different things that they do. Same thing with the domains, and you have in addition to the different cards in your deck, you have the skill cards that stay out all game and give you very different powers depending on which of these decks you chose. So the replayability is phenomenally high, and that process of selecting your character at the beginning of the game is really fun. It's normally done by drafting, so when you're playing, you randomly determine who gets the first choice. That person chooses which character deck they want to take. Then you go clockwise around the table, and everyone picks in order, picks a character. When you get to the last player, they're obviously getting last choice on their character, but then they immediately make the first choice on the lineage, the type of magic. And then you go back counterclockwise around the table, picking your lineage. And then when you get back to the first player, they pick first on their domain. They pick their last lineage, but then they pick the first domain, and then go clockwise around the table again. And a neat feature in that is the lineage decks, the one you're picking in the middle, has twice as many cards as the character and the domain decks. So the player who picks first is getting first pick on 20 cards, a 10-card character deck and a 10-card domain deck. The character who is picking last would get first pick on 20 cards as well, the 20-card lineage deck. So that process can be really fun.
Now, I see. So the example you gave were minions fighting minions.
Yeah.
What? I guess where does the character themselves come into play?
So the Scandi that represents you in the battlefield. Now you are too powerful to be killed by these minions. You're instead leading your forces. So you're like a general on the battlefield. You're not personally going out and killing all the stuff out there. You're directing your forces on what they're doing and where they're going. To represent those benefits you're giving, you have your 3 cards. So for example, Masilda, you can spend an action, turn this card sideways to take an enemy minion that costs 4 or less, so for example this guy, and turn it sideways so it won't get to attack that turn in combat. So she can basically tie up one of the enemy minions. The Necromancer, when you bring back one of those zombies from your discard pile, if you do it in the location Masilda is in, you can weaken an enemy minion twice. Weakening is damage. damage, so basically damage counters, as long as that won't kill the minion. So you could, for example, if this Vengeful Baron didn't have any damage on him, when you did that, you could put 2 damage on this enemy minion. If he already had a point of damage, you'd weaken him once, you'd go to weaken him a second time, but that would kill him, so that weakening would fail. So that's the Necromancer ability. And the Forgotten Temple, whenever you attack with a minion in the location that your character is in, you can turn this sideways to remove a point of damage from your attacking minion. So basically you can heal them. So basically these special abilities will give you really cool advantages in that particular battlefield. So that's the role of your avatar standee. That's showing where you are personally leading the forces, giving them these benefits.
Is there any way to target your opponents?
So there's no way to target your opponent's standee directly. You don't have, for example, a health total. You are simply trying to control these battlefields. However, there are some things that you can do to an opponent, like maybe you have a card that steals cards from your opponent's hand, or and in some cases, like we have. You might have a card or an effect that let you make an extra attack in the location your standee was in, like representing maybe you getting your hands dirty and making an attack yourself. So there are various things where you might get a little extra bonuses where you are, or your opponent might be able to do something nasty to you, but you yourself cannot be killed. You lose by your opponent gaining control of 2 of the 3 battlefields.
Awesome. Well, it looks great. Very cool.
Yeah.
I especially like the character picking.
Yeah, the character selection is.
It's a lot of variation.
Yeah.
And it's very cool.
And the decks are all really thematic. The lead designer on this project worked for years on it, and he did a lot of research into various legends and lore around the world, and used those as the basis for many of the cards and the types of magic, etc. So the artwork is phenomenal. There's just so much beautiful
I really
work
like
on
the
it.
board,
And now the theme is dark. This is a fantasy horror game, so it's not for the little kids. You've got demons and zombies and vampires and all kinds of nasties.
I don't know. I've got some pretty weird little kids.
Well, fair. I mean, but yeah, I mean, I'd basically, if they're of an age where you'd watch like a horror movie or Walking Dead or something with them, then sure, it's a horror theme, so not for the little ones, but once they're okay with handling those kinds of themes, then this game's awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.